Marcus Chen had been working as a maintenance technician on Kepler Station for 3 years, and he thought he'd seen everything the galaxy's black market had to offer. The massive space station orbited a dead world in the outer rim, serving as a trading hub for legitimate merchants and smugglers alike. The Galactic Consortium turned a blind eye to most activities here, as long as the taxes were paid and the major shipping lanes remained clear. But nothing had prepared him for what he discovered in Collector Vex's private quarters. Marcus was supposed to be fixing a malfunctioning air recycler in the Krillian trader's luxury suite. Vex was a wealthy collector of rare biological specimens, the kind of alien who paid top credits for exotic creatures from across the galaxy. His collection was legal, technically, though Marcus had always found something unsettling about the way Vex's 6 eyes gleamed when he talked about his prizes. The air recycler was hidden behind a wall panel in Vex's trophy room, a space filled with transparent containers, housing various alien creatures. Most were small, harmless things, bioluminescent insects from the Vega system, crystalline creatures that sang in harmonious frequencies, flying jellyfish-like beings that changed colors based on their mood. Marcus had seen similar displays in xenobiology museums. He was elbow-deep in the recycler's innards when he heard it, a sound so soft he almost missed it over the hum of the station's life support systems. It was a whimper, barely audible, but distinctly sad, heartbroken even. Marcus paused, his tools forgotten. The sound came again, a tiny sob that made his chest tighten. He'd heard crying before, of course, but this was different. This was the sound of someone trying not to be heard, someone who had given up hope that anyone would care. Following the sound, Marcus found himself staring at what appeared to be an antique bird cage tucked into a corner of the room. It was an ornate thing, clearly expensive, with golden bars and intricate decorative elements. But what stopped Marcus cold was what was inside. Huddled in the corner of the cage, no bigger than his hand, was a tiny humanoid figure. She had pale blue skin, large dark eyes that glistened with tears, and flowing silver hair that reached her miniature ankles. Delicate wings, like those of a butterfly but translucent and shimmering, drooped from her shoulders. She wore what looked like a tattered dress made from flower petals, and her tiny feet were bare. When she noticed Marcus staring, she scrambled backwards, pressing herself against the far side of the cage. Her wings wrapped around her small body like a protective shield, and she made herself as small as possible. The fear in her eyes was absolute and heartbreaking. Marcus felt his stomach drop. In all his travels, in all the species he'd encountered, he'd never seen anything quite like her. She was clearly sentient. The intelligence in her eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't some exotic pet or curiosity. This was a person. A child, trapped in a cage meant for birds. "Hey," Marcus whispered, crouching down to her level. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The tiny being didn't respond. But she stopped trying to make herself smaller. Her large eyes studied him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Marcus could see that she was thin, too thin, and there were marks on her arms that looked suspiciously like bruises. His hands clenched into fists. Marcus had seen a lot of injustice in his life, had learned to keep his head down and mind his own business in the lawless regions of space. But this was different. This was a child, and she was being treated like property. "What's your name?" he asked softly, though he wasn't sure if she could understand him. The tiny girl tilted her head, then pointed to herself. In a voice no louder than a whisper, so quiet that Marcus had to strain to hear, she said, "Lyra." Marcus's heart nearly stopped. She could speak, could understand him. This made everything worse and better at the same time. Worse because it confirmed his fears about her sentience and suffering. Better because it meant he could communicate with her, could try to help. "I'm Marcus," he said, keeping his voice gentle. Are you hurt?" Lyra nodded slowly, then lifted one tiny arm to show him the bruises. She said something in a language he didn't recognize, then seemed to remember he couldn't understand. In heavily accented Standard Galactic, she whispered, "Bad man hurt Lyra. Lyra try be good, but bad man still hurt." The rage that filled Marcus was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. He'd been in firefights, had faced down pirates and smugglers, but nothing had ever made him feel this protective, this angry. Someone had been abusing a child, treating her like an animal, keeping her in a cage for their own twisted pleasure. "How long have you been here?" Marcus asked, trying to keep the anger out of his voice so he wouldn't scare her. Lyra thought for a moment, counting on her tiny fingers. "Many, many days. Son not come here, so Lyra not know. But many sleeps." Her voice broke a little. "Lyra miss home, miss family." Marcus felt his resolve harden. This wasn't just wrong, this was evil. And if the Galactic Consortium wouldn't do anything about it, if the station authorities were too corrupt or too scared to act, then he would have to. "Where is your home?" he asked. "Etheria," she said, and the way she pronounced it, with such longing, made Marcus's chest ache. "Pretty world, with big trees and singing flowers. Lyra's people live in Harmony Grove. Papa is grovekeeper. Mama makes music from starlight." Tears began to fall down her small cheeks. "Bad men come in big ship, take Lyra and others. Lyra only one left now." The implications of what she was saying hit Marcus like a physical blow. She'd been kidnapped, taken from her family and her world, and she wasn't the only one. There had been others who were probably dead now or sold off to different collectors across the galaxy. "Listen to me, Lyra," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fury building inside him. "I'm going to get you out of here. I'm going to take you home." Lyra's eyes widened, and for the first time since he'd found her, she moved closer to the bars of her cage. "Really? Marcus take Lyra home?" "I promise," Marcus said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. He didn't know how he was going to do it. Didn't know what it would cost him, but he was going to get this child back to her family. The sound of approaching footsteps made them both freeze. Lyra immediately retreated to her corner, wrapping her wings around herself again. Marcus quickly turned back to the air recycler, grabbing his tools and pretending to work. Collector Vex entered the room, his 6 eyes scanning the area suspiciously. The Krillian was tall and spider-like, with chitinous skin and long articulated limbs. He wore expensive robes that marked him as nobility from his homeworld, and his movements were always calculated, predatory. "Human," Vex said, his voice carrying the clicking undertones typical of his species. "Why do you take so long with simple repair?" "Complex problem," Marcus replied without looking up, hoping his voice sounded steady. "The filtration matrix is completely fouled. Need to replace several components." Vex clicked his mandibles in annoyance. "How long more?" "Hour, maybe 2, Marcus lied. He needed time to figure out how to help Lyra, time to plan. "Be quick about it," Vex said. "I have important guests arriving tomorrow. My collection must be perfect for viewing." The way he said "collection" made Marcus sick to his stomach. He watched as Vex moved around the room, checking on his various caged creatures. When the alien reached Lyra's cage, he tapped the bars with one long finger. "And you, little morsel," Vex said to the cowering Etherian. "Tomorrow you perform for very special visitor. Vexlord Kronos comes to see my rarest acquisitions. You will sing, you will dance, you will be good entertainment. Yes?" Lyra didn't respond. Just pressed herself harder against the back of the cage. Vex's eyes narrowed, and Marcus saw him reach for something that looked like a small electrical prod. "I said yes?" Vex repeated, his voice deadly. "Yes," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. "Lyra will perform." "Good." Vex put away the prod. but the threat was clear. See that you do. Lord Kronos does not like to be disappointed. When Lord Kronos is disappointed, Vex is disappointed. When Vex is disappointed... He left the sentence hanging, but reached out to tap the cage bars again, harder this time, making Lyra flinch. Marcus had to bite his tongue to keep from saying something that would get them both killed. Instead, he forced himself to focus on his work, to appear oblivious to what was happening just a few feet away. After what felt like an eternity, Vex finally left the room. Marcus waited several minutes to make sure he was really gone before turning back to Lyra. The tiny girl was shaking, her wings wrapped so tightly around herself that Marcus could barely see her. The fear radiating from her small form was palpable. "Lyra," Marcus said softly, "are you okay?" She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Bad man want Lyra to perform for worse man tomorrow. Lyra scared. Last time Lyra perform, bad man hurt Lyra very much after." Marcus felt his jaw clench. "What kind of performance?" "Lyra must sing sad songs, must dance like Lyra happy to be here, must pretend Lyra love being in cage." Her voice cracked. "But Lyra not happy. Lyra want go home. Want see Papa and Mama." "You won't have to perform," Marcus said firmly. "I'm getting you out of here tonight." "But how?" Lyra asked, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. "Cage has strong lock. Marcus not have key." Marcus examined the cage more closely. The lock was electronic, sophisticated, probably biometrically coded to Vex's genetic signature. But Marcus hadn't spent 3 years maintaining a space station's systems without learning a few things about security bypasses. "I can handle the lock," he said, "but I need to figure out how to get you off the station safely. Do you know anything about the ship that brought you here? Any details about the people who took you?" Lyra thought carefully. Big ship, with markings like twisted serpent. Men wore black armor, had weapons that make blue light. Leader had metal face, spoke in mechanical voice. "They take Lyra and Sister Aria and Cousin Mel from garden where we pick moonberries." The description sent chills down Marcus's spine. Twisted serpent markings, black armor, energy weapons. That sounded like the Obsidian Syndicate, one of the most ruthless criminal organizations in the galaxy. They dealt in everything from weapons running to slave trading, and they had connections throughout the Outer Rim. If the Syndicate was involved, this was bigger than just one sick collector. Lyra was part of a larger trafficking operation, which meant there were probably more victims out there, more children torn from their families and sold to the highest bidder. But it also meant that rescuing Lyra would put him in the crosshairs of some very dangerous people. The Syndicate didn't forgive and forget. If he helped her escape, they would hunt him to the ends of the galaxy. Marcus looked at the tiny girl, still shaking in her cage, still hoping despite everything she'd been through. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. "Okay," he said. "Here's what we're going to do." He quickly outlined his plan. It wasn't perfect, and there were a dozen ways it could go wrong, but it was their best shot. He would finish his work here, then come back during the night shift when security was lighter. He'd disable the cage lock and get Lyra out. Then they'd make their way to the maintenance tunnels that ran throughout the station. "Where will we go then?" Lyra asked. "I have a friend who runs a small transport ship," Marcus explained. "Captain Sarah Martinez. She's hauled cargo for me before, and she's got a good heart. I think she'll help us get you to a safe place where we can figure out how to get you home." "What if bad man catch us?" Marcus met her eyes, and his voice was steady and sure when he answered. "Then I'll make sure he never hurts anyone again." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because Lyra nodded slowly. Lyra trusted Marcus. "Good," Marcus said. "Now, I need you to be very careful. Don't let Vex know that we've talked. Pretend to be just as scared and hopeless as before. Can you do that?" "Lyra is good at pretending," she said sadly. "Lyra pretended many times to stay alive." Marcus felt his heart break a little more. "Not much longer," he promised. "Just a few more hours, and then you'll be free." As he packed up his tools, Marcus's mind was already racing ahead to the challenges they'd face. Getting Lyra out of the cage would be the easy part. Getting her off the station without being detected would be much harder. And getting her safely back to her homeworld, past the syndicate and whatever other criminals might be involved, would be nearly impossible. But looking at the tiny girl in her cage, remembering the hope in her voice when he'd promised to take her home, Marcus knew he would find a way. Humans didn't have the advanced technology of some species, didn't have the psychic abilities or the natural armor or the extended lifespans, but they had something else, something that made them special in the galactic community. They had the stubborn refusal to let injustice stand. They had the courage to do what was right, even when it was dangerous. They had the determination to protect the innocent, no matter the cost. And tonight, Marcus was going to prove that human compassion was stronger than alien cruelty, that human determination could overcome impossible odds. Tonight, he was going to save Lyra and show the galaxy what humans were truly capable of when someone they cared about was in danger. The next several hours were the longest of Marcus's life. He went through the motions of his normal routine, but his mind was entirely focused on the rescue plan. Every detail had to be perfect. One mistake, one moment of bad luck, and both he and Lyra would end up dead or worse. After finishing his shift, Marcus made his way to the lower levels of Kepler Station, where the independent traders and smaller shipping companies maintained their berths. The corridors here were dimmer, less well-maintained, and filled with the kinds of people who preferred to stay out of official notice. It was exactly where he needed to be. Captain Sarah Martinez's ship, the Stellar Wanderer, was docked in Bay 97. The transport vessel wasn't much to look at, a battered freighter that had seen better decades, but Marcus knew its FTL drive was top-notch, and its captain was someone who could be trusted. He found Sarah in her ship's cargo hold, checking the seals on a shipment of agricultural equipment bound for a farming colony in the Beta Centauri system. She was a woman in her 40s, weathered by years of space travel, with graying hair tied back in a practical ponytail, and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of honest work. "Marcus," she said without looking up from her inventory pad, "what brings you down to the cheap seats? Usually only see you when my enviro systems are acting up." "I need a favor, Sarah, a big one." Something in his tone made her look up. Sarah Martinez had been flying the space lanes for 20 years, and she'd developed good instincts about when people were in trouble. The expression on Marcus's face clearly told her this was serious. "What kind of favor?" she asked, setting down her pad. Marcus looked around to make sure they were alone, then moved closer. "I need passage to the Etherian system. No questions asked, no official logs, and we leave tonight." Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "The Etherian system? That's 3 weeks' travel each way, Marcus, and it's not exactly on the main shipping routes. What's this about?" Marcus had debated how much to tell her. Sarah was a good person, but she also had to make a living, and getting involved with whatever was happening could put her business at risk. But looking at her now, seeing the genuine concern in her eyes, he decided to trust her with the truth. "There's a child," he said quietly. "An Etherian child, being held prisoner by one of the collectors up station. She was kidnapped from her homeworld, and she's being abused." Sarah's expression hardened. Like most independent traders, she'd seen the worst that the galaxy had to offer, but crimes against children were something that crossed all species lines. It was universally despised, even among criminals. "How old?" she asked. "I don't know exactly, but she's small, even for her species. Maybe equivalent to a human 7- or 8-year-old. She's been keeping her in a birdcage, treating her like a pet." Marcus's hands clenched into fists as he spoke. Tonight, the collector is supposed to show her off to some important visitor. I can't let that happen. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus's face. This collector wouldn't happen to be Vex, would it? The Krillian with the exotic animal collection? You know him. Know of him, Sarah said grimly. Word gets around. Most traders won't deal with him directly, but he pays well for rare specimens. I always wondered where some of his collection came from. She paused. This is dangerous, Marcus. If Vex is connected to the syndicate like people say, helping this kid could get us both killed. I know, Marcus said. I'm not asking you to do this for free, Sarah. I've got credits saved up, enough to make it worth your while. And if you don't want to make the full trip to Etheria, just get us to a safe system where I can book passage on a regular transport. Sarah shook her head. This isn't about money, Marcus. If there's really a kid in trouble... She sighed and ran a hand through her graying hair. Damn it, my daughter's about that age. If someone took her, I'd want a stranger to do the right thing. Marcus felt relief wash over him. So you'll help? I'll help, Sarah confirmed. But we do this smart. I don't want to end up floating dead in space because we got sloppy. They spent the next hour going over the plan in detail. Sarah would prep the Stellar Wanderer for immediate departure, filing a fake cargo manifest that showed a routine supply run to a mining station in the opposite direction. Meanwhile, Marcus would return to the upper levels and wait for the night shift change at Oro 200 hours. Security's lightest between Oro 230 and Oro 300, Marcus explained. Most of the guards are focused on the docking bays and the main commercial areas. The residential sectors rely mostly on automated systems. What about getting from Vex's quarters to my ship? Sarah asked. That's a lot of ground to cover. Marcus had already thought of that. Maintenance tunnels. There's a whole network of them running through the station's superstructure. I've been working on them for 3 years. I know every route. We can get from the residential sector to the docking bays without using any of the main corridors. And the kid? Is she going to be able to handle crawling through maintenance tunnels? She's small and she's desperate, Marcus said. I think she'll manage. But I'm bringing a portable oxygen supply just in case. Some of those tunnels don't have full life support. Sarah nodded approvingly. Good thinking. What about after we're away from the station? Vex is going to notice she's missing pretty quickly. That's where things get tricky, Marcus admitted. The Etherian system is in consortium space, so we should be safe once we're there. But the trip will take us through some rough territory. Pirates, syndicate patrol zones, independent worlds with questionable loyalties. The Wanderer's not exactly a warship, Sarah pointed out. No, but she's fast, and you know the hidden routes better than anyone. We avoid the main space lanes, stick to the back channels and minor systems. It'll take longer, but it'll be safer. They continued planning until Marcus was confident they'd covered every contingency they could think of. There were still 100 things that could go wrong, but that was always true in space. Sometimes you just had to trust in luck and human ingenuity. As Marcus prepared to leave, Sarah caught his arm. One more thing, she said. This kid, Lyra, what if she doesn't want to go with us? What if she's too scared? Or what if she's been conditioned to think this is normal? Marcus had been worrying about the same thing. I think she wants to go home more than anything. But you're right, she's been traumatized. We'll have to be patient with her, make sure she understands we're trying to help. I've got some experience with scared kids, Sarah said quietly. Lost cargo runners trying to work their way back to civilization, refugees fleeing war zones. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just let them know they're safe and give them time to adjust. Marcus felt grateful again for Sarah's presence. This wasn't going to be easy, and having someone with experience would make all the difference. He made his way back to the upper levels of the station, stopping by his own quarters to gather supplies. A small medical kit, portable breathing apparatus, high-energy food bars, and a few tools that weren't standard maintenance equipment. He also grabbed his personal sidearm, a compact energy pistol that he'd never had to use in anger, but kept in good working order. The corridors of Kepler Station during the night shift had a different character than during the day. The commercial areas were mostly shuttered, the crowds were thinner, and the lighting was dimmed to conserve power. Security patrols were less frequent but more focused, and Marcus had to be careful to avoid areas where his presence might be questioned. He found a hiding spot in a maintenance alcove near Collector Vex's residential section and settled in to wait. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every sound made him jump. Every shadow could be hiding a security guard or one of Vex's associates. At exactly 0230 hours, Marcus emerged from his hiding spot and made his way to Vex's quarters. The corridor was empty, just as he'd expected. The rich and powerful residents of this section kept different hours than the working crew, and most of them were either sleeping or attending private parties in the station's exclusive entertainment venues. Vex's door was secured with a high-grade lock, but Marcus had been preparing for this. One of the advantages of being a maintenance technician was access to override codes for emergencies. It took him less than 2 minutes to bypass the security and slip inside. The trophy room was dimly lit, with only the soft glow from the various habitat containers providing illumination. Marcus could hear the gentle humming of life support systems and the occasional sound from the various alien creatures in their cages. But underneath it all, he could hear something that made his heart ache, soft crying from the corner where Lyra's cage sat. He approached quietly, not wanting to startle her. The tiny Etherian was curled up in a ball, her wings wrapped around herself, sobbing quietly into her hands. She looked even smaller and more fragile than he remembered. "Lyra," he whispered. She looked up, and he could see the tear tracks on her small face. For a moment, she seemed confused, as if she couldn't believe he was really there. Then recognition dawned, and her expression transformed from despair to desperate hope. "Marcus, come back," she said, her voice barely audible. "Lyra think maybe dream." "Not a dream," Marcus assured her, already working on the cage's electronic lock. "I promised I'd get you out of here, and I keep my promises." The lock was more sophisticated than he'd expected, but Marcus had come prepared. He attached a small device to the locking mechanism, a security bypass tool that he'd borrowed from the station's security office. It would take a few minutes to cycle through the possible combinations, but it would get them in eventually. "Where we go?" Lyra asked, hope and fear warring in her voice. "I have a friend with a ship," Marcus explained, watching the bypass device work. "We're going to take you home to Etheria, to your family." Lyra's eyes went wide. "Really? Marcus, take Lyra to Papa and Mama?" "Really," Marcus confirmed. "But it's going to be dangerous. We have to be very quiet and very careful. Can you do that?" Lyra nodded vigorously. "Lyra, be very quiet. Lyra, do anything to go home." The lock finally clicked open, and Marcus carefully lifted the cage door. For a moment, Lyra just stared at the opening as if she couldn't believe it was real. Then she slowly stepped out, stretching her tiny limbs and flexing her wings. "Free," she whispered, and the wonder in her voice nearly brought tears to Marcus's eyes. But they weren't really free yet. They still had to get off the station without being detected, then make the dangerous journey to Etheria through space, controlled by criminals and pirates. Marcus knelt down and held out his hand. "Climb on," he said. "We need to move quickly." Lyra hesitated for just a moment, then stepped onto his palm. She was incredibly light, weighing no more than a small bird. Her tiny hands gripped his thumb for balance as he carefully stood up. "Hold on tight," he whispered. "This is going to be scary, but I won't let anything happen to you." They made their way out of Vex's quarters and into the corridor. Marcus moved as quickly as he dared, staying in the shadows and avoiding the main thoroughfares. Lyra was true to her word. remaining absolutely silent even when they had to hide in alcoves to avoid passing security guards. The entrance to the maintenance tunnels was hidden behind a false panel in one of the utility corridors. Marcus had discovered it during his first week on the station and had used it several times to access hard-to-reach system components. He carefully opened the panel and peered inside. The tunnel was cramped and dimly lit, filled with the constant hum of the station's mechanical systems. It wasn't a pleasant place for humans, and Marcus could only imagine how intimidating it must seem to someone as small as Lyra. "This is the hard part," he told her quietly. "We have to crawl through some tight spaces to reach the docking bays. Are you ready?" Lyra looked at the tunnel entrance, then back at Marcus. Despite her obvious fear, her voice was steady when she answered. "Lyra ready. Lyra want to go home." They entered the tunnels, with Marcus leading the way and Lyra clinging to his shoulder. The journey through the station's mechanical passages was slow and nerve-wracking. They had to navigate around massive conduits, squeeze through spaces barely large enough for a human body, and constantly listen for any sounds that might indicate they'd been discovered. At one point, they heard voices echoing through the tunnels, security guards investigating some minor alert. Marcus and Lyra huddled in a junction between two major pipes, barely breathing, until the voices faded away. "Almost there," Marcus whispered, as they finally reached the tunnels that ran alongside the docking bays. But as they approached the exit that would put them near Sarah's ship, Marcus heard something that made his blood run cold. Voices, getting closer, speaking in the clicking language of the Krillians. "Search all vessels," one voice was saying in accented Standard Galactic. "Lord Kronos arrives in 4 hours. Valuable property must be recovered before then." Marcus felt Lyra tense on his shoulder. They'd been discovered. Somehow, Vex had realized that Lyra was missing and had alerted station security. Now they were trapped in the tunnels with guards between them and their escape route. But Marcus Chen was human, and humans had been getting out of impossible situations for millennia. They were adaptable, resourceful, and absolutely stubborn when it came to protecting the innocent. He wasn't going to let a bunch of alien criminals stop him from getting Lyra home. "Change of plans," he whispered to the tiny girl on his shoulder. "We're going to have to get creative." Marcus's mind raced as he listened to the Krillian guards spreading out through the docking bay area. They were systematically searching every ship, which meant Sarah and the Stellar Wanderer would be discovered soon. He had to find another way out. Then he remembered something from his first week on Kepler Station, an old emergency escape pod. Supposedly decommissioned, hidden in a forgotten section of the station's outer hull. It had been left over from the station's construction and was still technically functional, though it wasn't supposed to be used except in dire emergencies. This definitely qualified as a dire emergency. "Lyra," he whispered, "I need you to be very brave. We can't reach my friend's ship, so we're going to have to leave the station a different way." "How?" she asked, her tiny voice filled with trust despite everything they'd been through. "There's an escape pod. It's small and old, but it will get us away from here. Once we're in space, we can signal my friend and she'll pick us up." Marcus began working his way through the tunnels toward the station's outer sections. The escape pod was in a part of the station that had been sealed off years ago, accessible only through the maintenance shafts. It would take longer to reach, and it would be dangerous, but it was their only option. Behind them, Marcus could hear the search intensifying. More voices, more footsteps, and the occasional sound of ship doors being forced open. Whatever Vex had told the station security, they were taking it very seriously. "Human!" a voice suddenly echoed through the tunnels, distorted by the metal walls but clearly carrying anger and menace. "We know you are there. Return the property, and your death will be quick." Lyra whimpered and pressed herself closer to Marcus's neck. "They coming," she whispered. "Let them come," Marcus said grimly. "Humans don't give up easily." They reached a junction where the tunnel split in 3 directions. Marcus chose the path that led toward the outer hull. But as they crawled forward, he could hear movement in the tunnels behind them. The guards had found their trail. "This way," Marcus whispered, taking a side passage that was barely large enough for him to squeeze through. The space was so tight that he had to remove his tool belt and push it ahead of him, but it would be almost impossible for the larger Krillian guards to follow. They emerged into a section of the station that Marcus had only visited once before during his orientation tour. The walls here were older, covered with patches and repairs from decades of use. The lighting was sporadic, and the air had a stale quality that suggested minimal life support. But there, exactly where Marcus remembered it, was the access panel for Emergency Escape Pod 7. The panel was covered with warning labels in multiple languages. Authorized personnel only, emergency use exclusively, report all activations to station command. Marcus ignored them all and began working on the access codes. The security on the escape pod was much simpler than the locks on Vex's cage. It was designed to be accessible during genuine emergencies, when seconds could mean the difference between life and death. Within minutes, Marcus had the panel open and was looking at a cramped but functional escape pod. "It's small," he told Lyra apologetically. "Lyra is small too," she replied, and despite everything they'd been through, there was a hint of humor in her voice. Lyra fit anywhere Marcus fit. Marcus climbed into the pod and began the startup sequence. The systems were old but functional, and within minutes the little craft was humming with power. Life support activated, the tiny navigation computer came online, and the launch tubes began their pressurization cycle. But just as Marcus was about to seal the pod's hatch, he heard the sound he'd been dreading. Footsteps in the corridor outside, getting closer. "In there!" a voice shouted in Krillian. "The access panel is open!" Marcus slammed the hatch closed and locked it from the inside, then immediately activated the launch sequence. The pod's systems began their final countdown, but it would take 30 seconds for the launch tubes to fully pressurize. 30 seconds they might not have. The sound of energy weapons firing echoed through the corridor outside. The guards were trying to cut through the pod's outer hull, and while the escape pod was designed to withstand the vacuum of space, it wasn't built to resist sustained weapons fire. "Hold on, Lyra," Marcus said, strapping both of them into the pod's single acceleration couch. "This is going to be rough." The countdown reached 0, and Emergency Escape Pod 7 launched into space with a force that pressed Marcus and Lyra deep into their seat. Through the small viewport, Marcus could see Kepler Station falling away behind them, its lights growing smaller by the second. They were free. But they were also in a tiny, barely functional escape pod, millions of kilometers from the nearest friendly port, with no idea how long their life support would last. Marcus activated the pod's emergency beacon and began broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is Emergency Pod 7 from Kepler Station. Requesting immediate pickup. I have a civilian refugee aboard. Medical attention may be required." For several minutes, there was no response, except static. Then, like a miracle, Sarah Martinez's voice crackled through the comm system. "Marcus, is that really you? What the hell is going on up there? The station's gone crazy. Security alerts, lockdown procedures, ships being searched." "Long story," Marcus replied, relief flooding through him. "Can you pick us up?" "Already on my way," Sarah said. "I launched as soon as the shooting started. Figured you might need a quick exit." True to her word, the Stellar Wanderer appeared on their scopes within 20 minutes. Sarah executed a textbook docking maneuver, matching velocity with the escape pod and extending her ship's docking collar to create an airtight seal. When the pod's hatch opened, Sarah got her first look at Lyra. The tiny Etherian was still clinging to Marcus, her large eyes wide with amazement at finding herself aboard a real spaceship instead of trapped in a cage. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. "She's so small. Is she okay?" "Physically, yes," Marcus said carefully. Emotionally, that's going to take time. Sarah knelt down to Lyra's eye level. "Hello, little one," she said gently. "I'm Sarah. We're going to take you home now." Lyra looked between Marcus and Sarah, then spoke in her soft, musical voice. "Sarah is Marcus' friend? Sarah helped Lyra go to Papa and Mama?" "That's right," Sarah said, and Marcus could see tears in her eyes. "We're going to get you back to your family." But their troubles were far from over. Even as Sarah sealed the docking collar and prepared to jettison the escape pod, the Stellar Wanderer's sensors detected multiple ships launching from Kepler Station. "We've got company," Sarah announced from the bridge. "4 patrol craft armed and heading our way fast." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Vex wasn't giving up. The Collector had enough influence to mobilize station security, maybe even hired mercenaries. They were going to pursue the Stellar Wanderer until they recovered what they considered stolen property. "Can we outrun them?" Marcus asked. "In open space, yes," Sarah replied. "The Wanderer's FTL drive is better than anything they've got, but we need time to calculate a jump, and they're going to be on us in minutes." "Then we fight," Marcus said simply. Sarah looked at him in surprise. "Marcus, this is a cargo hauler, not a warship. We've got minimal weapons and no armor." "We've got something better," Marcus said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We've got a reason to win." The next few minutes were a deadly dance through the asteroid field that surrounded Kepler Station. Sarah pushed the Stellar Wanderer to its limits, weaving between massive chunks of rock while her pursuers fired energy bolts that lit up space around them. Marcus strapped Lyra into one of the ship's acceleration couches and took position at the gunner's station. The Wanderer's weapons were minimal, a single pulse cannon designed for clearing debris and discouraging pirates. But Marcus had grown up on a frontier world where every colonist learned to shoot. "There," he said, targeting one of the pursuing craft as it emerged from behind a particularly large asteroid. "Sarah, hard to starboard in 3, 2, 1. Sarah threw the ship into a sharp turn that would have been impossible for a larger vessel. Marcus's shot caught the pursuing craft square in its engine section, and it began tumbling out of control, venting atmosphere into space. "One down," Sarah announced, "but the others are getting closer." The remaining 3 pursuit craft had spread out, trying to box in the Stellar Wanderer. Their weapons were more powerful than Marcus's single cannon, and their hulls were reinforced for combat. In a straight fight, the cargo hauler didn't stand a chance. But humans had been winning impossible fights for thousands of years, not through superior firepower, but through superior tactics, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for what they believed in. "Sarah," Marcus said, "do you trust me?" "Absolutely," she replied without hesitation. "Then when I tell you to cut all power except life support and go completely dark. No engines, no lights, no active sensors." "That's insane," Sarah protested. "We'll be sitting ducks." "No," Marcus said, watching the tactical display as their pursuers closed in. "We'll be invisible." Marcus waited until the 3 remaining ships were in perfect formation, approaching the Stellar Wanderer from 3 different angles. Then he gave the order. "Now!" Sarah cut all power, and the Stellar Wanderer went completely dark. To their pursuers' sensors, the cargo ship had simply vanished. The 3 patrol craft, confused and unable to locate their target, began firing blindly into the asteroid field. That's when Marcus reactivated the ship's single cannon and fired 3 precise shots. Each pulse found its target. Not the heavily armored front sections of the enemy ships, but their sensor arrays and communication equipment. Within seconds, the 3 remaining pursuers were blind, deaf, and unable to coordinate their attacks. "Power up," Marcus ordered, and Sarah brought the Stellar Wanderer back to full operational status. "FTL drive is ready," she announced. "Where to?" "Etheria," Marcus said. "The long way around. through the frontier systems. Avoid all the major space lanes. As the stellar wanderer jumped to hyperspace, leaving the confused and damaged patrol craft far behind, Marcus finally allowed himself to relax. They'd done it. They'd actually rescued Lyra from one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the galaxy. But the real reward came later, when they reached Etheria and Marcus saw Lyra reunited with her family. The tiny girl's parents were exactly as she'd described them. Gentle beings who lived in harmony with their beautiful world. Her father was tall and ethereal, tending to a grove of singing trees, while her mother created music from beams of starlight. When Lyra threw herself into her parents' arms, when Marcus heard her joyful laughter for the first time since he'd met her, he knew that every risk had been worth it. "Thank you," Lyra's father said to Marcus in perfect, standard Galactic. "You have returned our most precious treasure. How can we ever repay such kindness?" Marcus looked at the tiny family, reunited at last, and shook his head. "No payment necessary," he said. "Just take good care of her." But as the stellar wanderer prepared to leave Etheria, Lyra ran up to Marcus one final time. She had something in her tiny hands, a small crystal that glowed with an inner light. "For Marcus," she said, placing the crystal in his palm. "Etherian friendship crystal. Means Lyra never forget brave human who save her. Means Marcus always have Lyra's people as friends." Marcus carefully pocketed the crystal, his throat tight with emotion. "I'll never forget you either, Lyra." As their ship lifted off from the beautiful world of Etheria, Sarah looked at Marcus with new respect. "What you did back there," she said. "Rescuing that child, taking on the syndicate, fighting those patrol ships. That wasn't just brave. That was something else entirely." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "I've traveled all over the galaxy," Sarah explained. "I've met hundreds of species, seen thousands of worlds. Most civilizations, when they reach a certain level of technology, they become careful. They calculate risks and benefits. They avoid unnecessary danger. They make logical choices." She paused, watching the stars stream past as they jumped to hyperspace. "But humans are different. When we see injustice, we don't calculate the odds. We don't worry about the risks. We just act. We do what's right, regardless of the consequences." Sarah smiled. "That little girl is alive and free because a human maintenance technician decided that some things are more important than personal safety." Marcus thought about that as they traveled through hyperspace toward their next destination. Sarah was right in a way. Other species might have walked away, might have decided that saving one small alien child wasn't worth challenging a powerful criminal organization. But Marcus was human, and humans had been protecting the innocent and fighting injustice since they'd first looked up at the stars. It was what made them special in a galaxy full of advanced civilizations. Not their technology, not their physical capabilities, but their absolute refusal to let evil go unchallenged. Years later, when Marcus had left Kepler Station far behind and was working as a security chief on a peaceful trading world in the inner systems, he would sometimes take out Lyra's crystal and remember their adventure. He'd heard through the galactic news networks that Collector Vex had been arrested by consortium authorities, that his illegal trafficking operation had been shut down, and that dozens of kidnapped beings had been returned to their families. The investigation had started with an anonymous tip about a missing Etherian child. Marcus smiled whenever he thought about that, and sometimes, when he was feeling particularly proud of his species, Marcus would tell the story to others, humans and aliens alike. He would tell them about a tiny girl in a cage, about the courage it took to do the right thing, and about how one human's determination to protect the innocent had made the galaxy a little bit safer for everyone. Because that's what humans did. They saw injustice, and they acted. They protected the weak, and they fought for what was right. They risked everything to save those who couldn't save themselves. and in a galaxy full of wonders and terrors, that made them special indeed. The crystal that Lyra had given him continued to glow softly in his hand, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change the universe. And in the vast darkness of space, Marcus smiled, knowing that somewhere among the stars, a tiny Etherian girl was growing up free because a human had decided that her freedom was worth any risk. That was the human way, and Marcus Chen was proud to be part of it.